The Cost of Doing Business by Jeffrey Halkett. As the rain fell upon the cold waters of Puget Sound, little wisps of smoke appeared, a result of the acidic effects of progress. Black Knight stood on the docks of Tacoma, staring at the wisps and thinking that the city had finally and fully become a dreck storm. This was another example of why he'd come to hate Seattle, or more accurately, to hate what Seattle represented. He had spent a quarter-century defending the city from bullies and thugs, all while the real criminals were looking down from their neon glass towers or their draconic eyries. He knew that Mr. Johnson was one of those fetid cancers on the city. Knight knew what to expect as the sleek, dark Mitsubishi night sky rolled with an electronic roar up to the docks. It sat there, the electronic engine simulating the paw of a tiger ready to pounce. Knight checked in with the rest of his team, making sure everyone was ready for the sudden but inevitable betrayal of their employer. In many cases, it was easier to dispose of your assets than to pay them, so in this business, paranoia was the norm. The window rolled down smoothly. A lithe, graceful hand stretched out of the window, beckoning Knight to the car. As he approached, he noticed that he couldn't see the arm's owner. He had never actually met Mr. Johnson, but Knight assumed that he was an elf. Elves had an elegant charm to them that was equal parts endearing and infuriating, as well as a sense of the dramatic, like the arm was displaying. While making sure he wasn't far from potential cover, he pulled a data chip out of its slot in his comlink and placed it on the outstretched hand. The alabaster fingers wrapped around it and retreated inside. The window began to roll up as the car's engine roared louder. Knight knew that he was betrayed. He signaled to his team that the fight was on and ducked behind a massive reel of cable. As the night sky peeled away in a shower of gravel and asphalt, Borderline took a look through the lens of her SmartLink-enabled as-technology striker. The SmartLink indicated that Black Knight was out of range of the warhead and that a lock had been acquired on the night sky. She pressed the button and heard the distinctive and satisfying thwomp of the rocket leaving the tube as it sailed through the night. Borderline savored every second of it, recording it all on her comlink. It exploded into the front of the night sky, taking out the whole front axle and leaving the car disabled. Borderline had a reputation for being a bit more reckless than most runners Knight could have hired, but the old veteran had a gut feeling and decided to take a gamble on her. Throughout the run, she had done everything in a much more professional manner than he expected, taking orders and avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Now the leash was off, and Borderline knew it. She cackled with mad delight as she activated her Spin X brand hand razors and a wired reflex system. As her bladed fingers encased the hilt of her razor-sharp katana, Borderline noticed the time dilation effects of her wired reflexes kicking in. No matter how often she used them, it was always darkly satisfying. Everything around her slowed to a crawl, and she could see each individual raindrop. She saw the elves in green armor approaching Black Knight's position, and ran at them as fast as she could. The first elf she met turned towards her, but too slowly. By the time he faced her, she had lifted a plate of his armor with her left hand and brought her right into his exposed flesh. With wide-eyed ferocity, she pulled her hand back across him hard. 1 down, 6 more to go. The rest wouldn't be so easy. They had noticed her attack. With lupine grace and speed, Borderline repositioned herself to try to find a new angle and protected herself by darting amongst the shipping containers. A stealthy black Lockheed Optic X spy drone soared above the battlefield, providing a bird's-eye view of the attack to Sounder. Sounder sat in her submersible craft a couple of 100 meters away from the battlefield, prepared to move in quickly to provide an extraction if the team needed it. In the meantime, her drones would help ensure that Mr. Johnson never got away. She saw as Mr. Johnson attempted to betray the team. She watched as Borderline fired the rocket that triggered the counterattack. She got the alert from Black Knight to activate the traps and had done so. Shipping containers failed to block the roads in and out of the area. Then she looked on as Borderline tore something meaty out of the side of one of the soldiers. That was the image she needed. Borderline had lifted the armor plating, and Sounder was able to cross-reference this image against her database of known uniforms. She expected there wouldn't be a result, but to her surprise it came up with the name of the Tier Paladins. Sandra captured the whole battle on her feed, prepared to leak footage to her contacts at KSAF if necessary. The local media would absolutely be interested in an elven military unit being deployed on sovereign soil, even if said soil's sovereignty was currently in dispute. Just as she began to lean back and relax a bit, she noticed several blips on her radar racing towards the dock. She tried to get a look at what was approaching, but couldn't see much out of her portholes. She indicated to Black Knight that his hunch had been correct. "Looks like we got Marrow approaching fast, boss, just like you said they would." She didn't take much comfort in knowing that things were going according to plan. "Yay, the cavalry is coming." The sarcasm dripped from Respec's every word. She had been in the Matrix since before the meet had happened, keeping the team's positions secret and monitoring for any opposition. Safely stowed away from the rest of the fighting was Respec's body. She had slipped away from it before the fight had started and had been running a passive form of Overwatch from the deep end of the Matrix. Through the virtual reality of the Matrix and Respec's unique connection to it, she felt the presence of the electronic devices around her. Respec gathered resonance to her, feeling the ebb and flow of data and connection, providing it shape, form, and life. With a snap of her virtual fingers, she created a sprite she called Sid. Sid stood before her with an oversized sword and way too much hair. She asked Sid to go demolish any enemy electronic devices, and the sprite made a short chime before blinking away into the battlefield. She could see him swinging his gigantic sword at guns, comlinks, and anything else that he could find. Sparks popped out of these devices with each swing, and she knew that the opportunity she was looking for would present itself soon. The enemy hacker stopped trying to mask the devices and started to look for the cause of the mayhem. As a result, he made himself known to Respec. She coalesced the energy of the resonance at her command and shaped it into a ball of her own design, a shape that reminded her of footage she had seen of old video games back when they still had single-digit bits. She flung the ball of virtual fire at the enemy hacker, and it moved in an arcing pattern, bouncing along the ground until it hit the target solidly. Unfortunately, the hacker had anticipated the attack, and the fireball died in a firewall. The hacker then looked directly at Respec's persona, a buff, anime-inspired man with a purple short, high-collared blue jacket and gold chains. The attack was faster than Respec had expected, and it slipped past her defenses. The damaging code was nasty. Biofeedback damage racked her head. Respec's vision darkened, and her head throbbed as the code consumed her every thought. In the back of her mind, she felt the trickle of blood dripping down her nose, and felt the concrete of the dock slapping against her body as it convulsed. With the last of her will, Respec reached out to the resonance and called for help. Something must have answered, because she felt the power of the resonance around her accumulate in a cacophonous wave. As soon as that wave touched her, she felt peace. A moment later, she unleashed this wave against the enemy hacker. She saw the hacker's icon disintegrate just before her vision went black. Black Knight was pinned down and couldn't reposition. Borderline had done a number on several of the paladins, but there were just too many of them. He felt that things were getting a little too close for comfort when the Marrow emerged from the water. There was a baker's dozen of them, and they rose with the force of a tidal wave. While in mid-air, two of them threw down a magical effect upon the battlefield, engulfing most of the paladins in a watery tornado on the docks. Black Knight saw as the paladins were picked apart by the remaining Marrow, who threw their harpoons at the elves with unearthly force. As the paladins fell before the onslaught of the Marrow's harpoons and their magic, Knight took the opportunity to help Respec. Knight insisted that all of his team wear biomonitors, and as soon as Respec had collapsed, Sounder moved in for extraction. Sounder was a few seconds away, but Knight needed to give Respec first aid immediately. He found her lying unconscious and with extensive injuries. He wasn't sure she would make it through this night, another casualty of the city. But he felt a faint pulse, so he had hope. He scooped her up and carried her over his shoulder to the middle of the docks, where the two exceptional shapes he'd seen earlier were now waiting. One was male, one was female. They both had vaguely draconic facial features, borrowing from mostly Asian cultures and in sharp contrast to the distinctly fish-like faces of the Marrow. They were both immaculately well built. While the man directed the Marrow to sweep the area, the woman moved peacefully towards Knight, softly saying, "We appreciate your call, Mr. Knight. Our mistress knows now that she can count on you for further work, should you wish to remain in the city during the negotiations. I trust that you have the real data chip somewhere on your person." Black Knight didn't want to be betrayed a second time. Borderline was a bit banged up, Respec was out of commission, and he just wanted to go home and crack a cold one. He reached up under his shirt and pulled the skin on his stomach. The smuggler's pocket opened with a wet pop, like a suction cup releasing from plasticrete. Knight reached in and pulled out a small data chip, visually identical to the one that he had given Mr. Johnson. He placed the chip in the hands of the woman in front of him, and she slipped several glistening cred sticks into his hand. The transaction done, the two drakes in the mirror returned to the water just as Sounder's submarine broke the surface. Sounder put a medkit on Respec and lowered her into the submarine for transport. Knight watched a blip on a map showing them easing away from the shore. He knew this was just the beginning of what Seattle had in store. He wrestled with the question of whether or not he wanted to protect his city still, knowing the metahuman cost that would be paid while the powers that be played their games.